You remember the lemon battery experiment from science class. Copper nail on one side, zinc on the other, a tiny LED flickering to life from nothing but fruit and two pieces of scrap metal. Your teacher called it a curiosity, a classroom trick, something to make you smile before moving on to the real lesson. The experiment existed to demonstrate a principle and then be forgotten. But what if that experiment was never just a trick? What if the same reaction, copper, zinc, and a moist conductor in between, could be happening right now, silently, underneath your garden? And what if that invisible current was actually feeding your plants, unlocking nutrients in the soil, and doubling growth without a single bag of fertilizer? A Scottish inventor proved it in 1841. Farmers witnessed it for decades. The science is documented, measurable, and reproducible today with $2 and a multimeter. So why have you never heard of it? That answer starts in 1913, and it has everything to do with who profits when your soil needs something you have to buy every single season. His name was Alexander Bain, and in 1841 he filed a patent that should have changed agriculture forever. Bain was a Scottish clockmaker, a practical man more interested in what worked than in what was fashionable. While other inventors of his era were chasing steam and spectacle, Bain was thinking about the ground beneath his feet. His observation was simple but radical. Two different metals buried in moist soil generate a measurable electric current. No acid, no chemical bath, no expensive components, just copper, zinc, and earth. He called it the earth battery. British patent number 8763 described how two plates of dissimilar metals, placed in damp ground and connected by a wire above the surface, could produce a steady, reliable current, enough to power clocks, enough to drive telegraph signals across miles of wire. And it worked. Bain's earth battery powered the world's first electric clocks. Telegraph stations across Britain adopted the technology, using buried copper and zinc plates to send signals over single wires, with the soil itself acting as the return path. Engineers documented how aligning the plates north to south and driving the zinc deeper could increase output. In the right conditions, moist, slightly acidic soil, the system ran for months without interruption. This was not a fringe experiment conducted in a basement. This was operational infrastructure, quietly humming beneath railway embankments and telegraph offices across Victorian England. But Bain noticed something else, something that wasn't in the patent documents, something that spread not through scientific journals but through the quiet observations of the people who worked the land. Wherever his buried plates lay hidden, the ground above them looked different. It started with grass. Telegraph workers began to notice that the strips of ground running above buried return plates looked different from the surrounding fields. The grass was darker, thicker, taller, not by a little, enough that a groundskeeper could spot it from a distance without knowing anything about what lay beneath. No fertilizer had been applied. No extra water. Just the silent presence of two buried metals and a weak current seeping through the earth. A station master in Yorkshire pointed it out to visiting engineers. A groundskeeper in Essex made jokes about the grass knowing where the wires were. The pattern repeated itself across the British countryside wherever earth return telegraph systems had been installed. Word spread slowly, the way agricultural knowledge always did, through conversation, through letters, through one farmer telling another over a fence. Decades later, a Connecticut physician named George Starr White picked up the thread. White was obsessed with what he called earth electricity, the idea that natural currents flowing through the soil could improve crop growth. His pamphlets described experiments where weak currents appeared to stimulate plant development in ways that conventional farming could not easily explain. His evidence was scattered. A patch of greener corn here, a row of beans that ripened early there. No controlled trials, no university endorsement. But the observations kept coming. An agricultural journal from 1915 described a farmer who swore his potatoes grew larger near a buried wire. A Midwestern newspaper reported on grapevines that seemed to thrive beside an old telegraph pole. The pattern was always the same, no official validation, just a persistent, recurring observation that something in electrified soil was feeding the plants above it. For most of the scientific establishment, these stories were folklore. Interesting, perhaps, but not worth investigating seriously. That dismissal would prove costly, because the mechanism was real, and the science to explain it was already sitting in the chemistry textbook. Here is what actually happens when you bury copper and zinc in moist soil. The two metals have different electrochemical properties. Zinc is the more reactive of the two. When it comes into contact with moist, mineral-rich soil, it begins to lose electrons. Those electrons travel through the wire connecting the two metals above ground, moving from the zinc toward the copper. The soil acts as the electrolyte, the medium that carries charged ions between the two plates and completes the circuit. This is called galvanic action. It is the same process that powers the battery in your phone, just slower, quieter, and running on nothing but earth and water. In the right conditions, moist soil with some mineral content and a slightly acidic pH, the voltage between a copper and zinc plate typically measures between 0.8 and 1.1 volts. Not much by the standards of modern electronics, but in the context of a living garden, that modest current triggers a chain of effects that compound over time. The first effect is electrolysis. As the current moves through the soil, it begins to break apart chemical bonds. Nutrients that were locked up in stable compounds, phosphates, calcium, potassium, start to shift. Ions migrate under the influence of the electric field, and in doing so, they become more accessible to plant roots. The battery is not adding anything new to the soil. It is unlocking what was already there, converting bound minerals into bioavailable forms that roots can actually absorb. Think of it like this. Your soil may already contain everything your plants need, but most of it is locked behind a chemical door. The earth battery does not bring new nutrients. It opens the door. The second effect is even more remarkable, and it comes from plant biology rather than soil chemistry. Roots are not passive structures. They do not simply absorb whatever happens to be nearby. Decades of research in plant physiology have established that roots actively respond to electric fields, a phenomenon called electrotropism. In controlled laboratory experiments, roots exposed to weak voltage gradients bend and grow toward the cathode, the copper plate, where electron flow is highest and nutrient availability is greatest. Studies have shown that roots can detect electric fields as weak as 1 millivolt per centimeter. The field generated by a basic copper and zinc earth battery setup, typically around 0.5 to 1 volt across a few centimeters of soil, falls directly within the range that triggers this response. So the system creates a double effect. The current unlocks nutrients in the soil, and the roots actively grow toward the zone where those nutrients are most concentrated. The third effect operates at the microbial level. Soil is not just dirt. It is a living ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, and microorganisms that play a critical role in breaking down organic matter and making nutrients available. The weak current from an earth battery shifts microbial populations in the soil, favoring organisms that accelerate decomposition and nutrient cycling. The soil becomes more biologically active, not less. And the measurable results reflect all three of these mechanisms working together. In a documented backyard experiment, 2 rows of lettuce were grown side by side. One row had a copper pipe and a galvanized nail buried in the root zone, connected by wire above ground. The other row was identical in every other way: same soil, same water, same sun exposure. After 4 weeks, the electrified row showed an average wet biomass of 38 grams per plant. The control row averaged 26 grams. That is a 46% increase. The voltage reading between the copper and zinc held steady at 1.03 volts throughout the trial. This is not magic. It is not pseudoscience. It is electrochemistry and plant biology, working together in a system that costs $2 and requires no maintenance beyond keeping the soil moist. So why did it disappear? To understand what happened to the earth battery, you need to understand what happened in 1913. In 1909, 2 German chemists named Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch solved one of agriculture's oldest problems. Nitrogen, the element most essential for plant growth, exists abundantly in the atmosphere, but is largely inaccessible to plants in its atmospheric form. For thousands of years, farmers had relied on crop rotation, manure, and legumes to replenish soil nitrogen naturally. It was slow, labor-intensive, and limited the scale at which food could be produced. Haber and Bosch found a way to pull nitrogen directly from the air and convert it into ammonia on an industrial scale. By 1913, the first commercial plant was running in Germany. Within 2 decades, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer was being produced and sold across Europe and North America. The impact on agriculture was enormous and largely positive. Crop yields increased dramatically. Food became cheaper and more abundant. The Haber-Bosch process is credited with enabling the food supply that supports roughly half the world's current population. But the economics of synthetic fertilizer created a logic that would quietly reshape how the entire industry thought about soil. Synthetic fertilizer is consumable. You apply it, the plants use it, and it is gone. Next season, you buy more. The business model depends on recurring demand. Farmers who return every year for another bag of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The earth battery operates on the opposite logic. You buy 2 scraps of metal once, install them in the ground, and the system runs indefinitely. No repeat purchase, no subscription, no supply chain dependency. The soil feeds itself using chemistry that has been present since the earth formed. Agricultural bulletins backed by government agencies began promoting NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, as the scientific standard for soil management. The message was elegantly simple. Healthy soil is something you buy, spread, and repeat. Anything outside that framework was labeled a curiosity at best, pseudoscience at worst. To understand what happened to the earth battery, you need to understand what happened in 1913. USDA bulletins from the late 1920s dismissed electroculture outright. Not because controlled trials had disproven it, but because it did not fit the model. It generated no recurring revenue, required no distribution network, and offered nothing to sell. No secret memo has surfaced. No smoking gun proving a deliberate campaign to suppress Bain's discovery. The record shows something more subtle and in some ways more troubling. A market that systematically rewarded the disposable and ignored the durable. A scientific establishment that validated what could be measured, packaged, and sold, and filed everything else under folklore. The earth battery was not banned. It was not debunked in a public trial or dismantled by a rival invention. It was simply made irrelevant by a system that had no use for something that lasted forever and cost nothing to maintain. Here is the part that matters most. Because the physics never changed. The same reaction that powered Victorian clocks and electrified telegraph lines still works in your garden today. The materials cost less than $2. The setup takes 15 minutes, and you can verify it is working with a basic multimeter before you plant a single seed. Here is exactly what you need. A length of copper pipe or heavy gauge copper wire, 6 to 8 inches long. This is your cathode, the positive terminal of your earth battery. You can find copper pipe offcuts at any hardware store or plumbing supplier for almost nothing. A galvanized nail or a strip of zinc metal, also 6 to 8 inches long. This is your anode, the reactive terminal that drives the current. Galvanized nails work because they are coated in zinc. A handful costs under $1. A length of insulated wire, long enough to connect the 2 metals above the soil surface with a few inches to spare. That is it. 3 components, under $2 total. To install the system, push the copper pipe into the soil on one side of your plant's root zone, approximately 6 inches deep. Place the galvanized nail on the opposite side of the root zone at the same depth, spacing the 2 metals 8 to 12 inches apart. The root zone should sit between them, inside the electric field. Strip the ends of your wire and connect one end to the copper, the other to the zinc. Make sure the wire runs above the soil surface where you can inspect it. This completes the circuit and allows current to flow through the soil between the 2 metals. Now pick up your multimeter, set it to DC voltage. Touch one probe to the copper and the other to the zinc. In moist, slightly acidic soil, you should see a reading between 0.8 and 1.1 volts. That number confirms the system is active and generating current. If your reading is below 0.5 volts, the soil may be too dry or too alkaline. Water the area and test again. If the reading drops significantly over time, check the zinc for heavy corrosion and replace it when needed. Zinc is the consumable element in this system, and it will slowly dissolve as it does its job. Keep a simple log. Record your voltage reading and soil moisture every few days. Track your plant growth against a control plant in the same conditions without the metals. The results typically become visible within 2 to 3 weeks and measurable by week 4. You are not taking anyone's word for this. You are running your own experiment with your own hands in your own garden. The multimeter does not lie. The plants do not lie. The data is yours. Step back for a moment and consider what this actually represents. A Scottish clockmaker buried 2 pieces of scrap metal in the ground in 1841 and discovered that the earth itself could generate electricity. That discovery quietly powered the Victorian communication network for decades. It was observed, documented, and repeatedly noticed by the farmers and workers who encountered it. And then synthetic fertilizer arrived, and within a generation, the earth battery had been reclassified as a curiosity with no practical value. Not disproven, not tested, and found wanting. Simply deprioritized by a market that needed consumers, not self-sufficient gardeners. The question worth sitting with is not whether the earth battery works. The voltage on your multimeter will answer that. The question is how many other methods, how many other discoveries, how many other approaches to growing food and living independently were quietly set aside for the same reason. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded in a way that nobody could monetize. The Haber-Bosch process genuinely transformed food production and has fed billions of people. That is real and worth acknowledging. But the logic it embedded in agriculture, that soil health is something you purchase rather than something you cultivate, has had costs that are still accumulating. Soil degradation, nitrogen runoff, dependency on supply chains that can break. The earth battery is not a solution to all of that. It is a $2 experiment in a backyard garden, but it points towards something larger. The idea that the ground beneath your feet is not just a medium for roots. It is a living system with its own chemistry, its own intelligence, and most of that potential has never been fully explored because there was never enough profit in exploring it. And that is worth sitting with long after this video ends, because the questions it raises do not stop at gardening. They point to a broader pattern. Valuable knowledge that generates no revenue disappears quietly, not banned, not debunked, just starved of attention until the next generation no longer knows to ask. That changes the moment you pick up a copper pipe and a galvanized nail and decide to find out for yourself. The physics has not changed since 1841. The reaction is the same. The soil is the same. The chemistry that powered Alexander Bain's clocks is still alive in your garden right now, waiting. The only thing that changed was who decided what was worth knowing and who decided what was worth selling. Run the experiment, log your voltage, track your plants, then come back and tell us what you found. And drop your reading in the comments. Copper and zinc, 2 weeks in. What did your multimeter say? I want to see real numbers from real gardens, not theory, not speculation. Actual voltage readings from actual soil, from people who decided to test instead of just wonder. If this made you question something you were never taught, something that was sitting in the ground the whole time, hit subscribe, because uncovering exactly that is what this channel exists for. And if you know someone who still buys fertilizer every single season without questioning it, send them this video. They deserve to know what quietly disappeared in 1913 and why it has never come back.